Hey, and welcome back to JBC English Learning Academy. My name is Laura, and I'm here to guide you on your journey to clear, confident, and natural English. If you truly love Jesus, like the video, subscribe to the channel, keep watching the video believing in Jesus, you will learn something good, and comment to let us know what you are watching. Your support truly helps this channel grow. Alright, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin today's session. When you listen to this story, I want you to imagine that you and I are walking slowly through a quiet place, maybe a small road with soft trees on both sides and a warm wind that touches your face. Because the story I will share with you begins with a moment when life felt too heavy, too confusing, too fast, and maybe you have felt this too, the kind of moment when the world becomes so loud that your own thoughts feel like they are shouting inside your head. And the main character of our story, a young man named Daniel, felt exactly this way on a cloudy Tuesday morning when he woke up with a tight feeling in his chest, as if the day was already too much before it even began. And as he sat on the side of his bed, he wondered why everything suddenly felt so overwhelming, because nothing big had happened, no disaster, no terrible news, but still, something inside him felt like 1,000 thoughts were running in all directions, and he could not catch a single one, and so he stood up slowly, hoping that moving would make him feel better. But the moment he stepped into the hallway of his small apartment, he felt that heavy wave again, and he whispered to himself, "Why can't I think clearly anymore?" And this question stayed with him the whole morning like a shadow he could not escape. And as he prepared his coffee, the smell rising into the air, he felt a moment of calm, but then his mind suddenly began listing all the things he needed to do: work, bills, messages he had not answered, promises he had not kept to himself, dreams he had started but never finished, and all these thoughts crashed into him at once like a big storm. And for a second, he felt like he wanted to freeze time, to stop everything, even just for a few minutes, because he needed space to breathe. But life did not stop, and the world did not pause for him. And so he drank his coffee quietly and realized he had to go out and face the day, even though he did not feel ready at all. And when he stepped outside, the air was cool, the sky was gray, and the city sounded louder than usual: cars, footsteps, voices, everything blending into a noise that made him worry that maybe there was something wrong with him. Maybe he was losing control of his mind. Maybe he was not strong enough to handle his own life. But as he walked to the bus stop, something small happened. Something that would later become the first piece of clarity he had felt in a long time. An older woman standing near the bench dropped her bag, and a few apples rolled out onto the sidewalk, and without thinking, Daniel bent down and helped her pick them up, and the woman smiled at him, a soft, warm smile that felt like sunshine on a cold day, and she said, "Thank you, dear. You look a little tired today. Remember to slow down." And then she walked away, and Daniel stood there for a moment wondering how she could see something he had not told anyone. And for the first time that morning, he took a long breath, not a rushed breath, not a stressed breath, but a slow, full breath. And he felt something shift inside him, like a small window opening in a crowded room, and that breath allowed him to hear a quieter voice inside him, a calmer voice, a voice that said, "Maybe I can take one step at a time." And when the bus arrived, he stepped inside with a new intention, not a big one, not a life-changing decision, but a simple goal: to understand why life felt overwhelming and how he could learn to think clearly again. And as the bus moved through the city, he watched people outside walking fast, talking fast, living fast, and he wondered if maybe everyone felt overwhelmed sometimes, but hid it behind busy schedules and tired smiles. And while he sat there, he remembered something his grandfather once told him: when life becomes blurry, it's usually because you are moving too fast. And these words echoed in his mind now, almost like a quiet guide. And as the city passed by outside the window, Daniel realized that his mind was not broken. He was not weak. He was simply human, and sometimes humans carry too much inside without noticing. And so he made a small promise to himself, a promise that became the beginning of a journey he never expected to take. He would try to understand his thoughts instead of running from them. He would try to breathe instead of panic. He would try to slow down instead of speeding up. Because maybe clarity was not something that suddenly appeared like a bright light. Maybe clarity was something we create moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. And as he stepped off the bus and walked toward his workplace, he felt the world was still loud, still busy, still heavy, but inside him, there was a tiny space of calm that had not been there before, and he held on to that space as if it were a small flame in the dark, knowing that if he protected it, it might grow. And this small flame of calm became the beginning of his journey toward clear thinking, even when life felt too overwhelming to handle. And as he reached the door of the building, he stopped for one more slow breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. And in that moment he understood something important, something simple but powerful. Clarity does not come from fixing everything at once. Clarity comes from giving yourself space to notice what is happening inside you. And he stepped through the door ready to begin his day, not with fear, but with a little more peace, a little more patience, and a small belief, just a small one, that maybe he could learn to think clearly again, even in a world that never stops moving. Daniel walked slowly down the street after leaving his building, feeling that little spark of calm he had discovered this morning. But even with that spark, he could feel the weight he had been carrying for weeks pressing down on his shoulders. Like an invisible backpack filled with worries he had forgotten he was holding. And as he passed people on the sidewalk, he noticed that everyone seemed to move so fast, talking, looking at their phones, carrying shopping bags, rushing somewhere, and he thought maybe they carried invisible weights too, but no one showed them. No one admitted them, and Daniel realized he had been carrying his weight silently for so long that he had forgotten it was there until it became too heavy to ignore. And the weight was not just one thing, it was many little things: unfinished work, small regrets, forgotten promises, fears he never said out loud, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes visited him at night, all of it stacking together until it felt like a mountain on his chest. And he remembered that the night before he had tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing through lists, worries, and doubts, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not stop. So he had gotten up and walked to the kitchen for water, hoping something simple might calm him. And now he understood that the weight he carried was not just stress from today or this week. It was years of unnoticed thoughts, habits, and emotions that had accumulated quietly until they demanded his attention. And he thought about how strange it was that we live with this weight without noticing, how normal it feels until one day, Suddenly, it becomes impossible to ignore, and as Daniel walked past a small park, he saw children playing, their laughter light and free. And it reminded him of a question he had asked himself many times. Why do we lose that feeling of lightness as we grow older? Why do our minds become so crowded with thoughts and fears that we forget how to breathe freely? How to enjoy a simple moment. And he realized that maybe part of learning to think clearly was learning to notice the weight before it becomes unbearable, to see it, name it, and understand it instead of letting it pile up silently. And as he sat for a moment on a park bench, he looked at the trees swaying in the wind, the clouds slowly moving across the sky, and he noticed that despite the noise, the cars, the people rushing by, there was a rhythm to life that was patient, steady, and calm. And he felt the strange contrast between that calm rhythm and the chaos in his own mind, and he began to wonder why the mind could be so busy when the world outside was moving at its own pace, not judging, not hurrying, just existing. And he thought that maybe the mind was like a room full of furniture where we keep adding more and more items without cleaning up, until we cannot walk through it without bumping into something, and then suddenly one day, we stop, feel trapped, and wish for space, for breathing room, for clarity, and in that moment, Daniel decided to experiment with something he had never tried before. He would simply observe his thoughts, like watching clouds move across the sky, without chasing them, without judging them, without trying to fix them, just noticing, because he remembered the woman on the street this morning who had told him to slow down, and he realized that slowing down was not only about moving slower physically, but also about allowing his mind to slow, to pause, to recognize the invisible burdens he carried. And so he closed his eyes briefly on the park bench, breathed deeply, and began to notice each thought as it appeared. A thought about work, a thought about a friend, a thought about something he had forgotten to do, and he simply observed, noticing its shape, its sound, its feeling without getting caught in it. And as he did this, something strange began to happen. The weight felt lighter, the mountain on his chest became smaller, and he realized that the weight had always been there, but it gained strength from his resistance, from his struggle against it, and when he stopped struggling and began noticing, it lost power, almost like a shadow disappearing when you turn on a light. And Daniel felt a small joy, a tiny relief, that he had not felt in weeks, and he understood that noticing the weight without judgment was the first step to clearing his mind, to making space for clarity, and he thought about how simple this idea was, yet how difficult it was to practice, because the mind always wants to run, always wants to fix, always wants to control, but for now, he would just watch, breathe, and notice, and as he stood up from the bench and continued walking, he felt a strange lightness in his steps, a small openness in his chest, and he promised himself that he would carry this practice throughout the day, returning to it whenever the weight started pressing down again, and he realized that the world outside, with all its noise, chaos, and movement, was not the enemy. The enemy, he understood, was the unobserved weight we carry inside, the thoughts and worries that pile up without attention. And as he passed a small cafe and smelled fresh bread, he allowed himself to smile quietly, because he could feel that small shift inside. The beginning of a transformation, a tiny space opening where clarity could grow, And Daniel understood something else, something he would repeat to himself throughout the day. Clarity is not about making everything perfect. It is not about solving every problem immediately. It is about creating space, noticing the weight, and breathing slowly into the moment. And he thought that maybe if he practiced this patiently, moment by moment, the overwhelming feelings would no longer control him. And life, no matter how fast it moved, would feel lighter, more manageable, and even beautiful. And as he walked out of the park and back into the rhythm of the city, he realized that today was not about finishing everything. It was about starting to notice, starting to breathe, starting to make space inside his mind. And that small beginning was enough, because even the longest journey starts with one step, and Daniel smiled to himself quietly, feeling the first true sense of clarity he had felt in a long time, a calm that was not complete yet, but real enough to guide him through the rest of the day. As Daniel walked through the city streets, he noticed something strange. Even though the air was clear, the sidewalks busy, and the sky visible, his mind felt foggy, as if he were moving through mist that he could not see past, and the fog was not real. It was inside him, a thick cloud of thoughts, worries, and unfinished stories that blurred everything, and he realized that this fog had been there for months, maybe years, growing quietly until it became hard to think clearly, and the fog made simple choices feel difficult. Deciding what to eat, what to say, how to respond to an email, even what route to take on a walk, all of it felt clouded, and Daniel noticed how exhausting it was to live in that fog, how every movement required extra energy. And as he crossed the street, he watched people rushing past, some smiling, some frowning, some completely absorbed in their own worlds, and he wondered if everyone carried fog in some way, if everyone felt confused sometimes, even if they did not show it. And he thought about how strange it was that the mind could feel so heavy and unclear, while the body moved automatically, walking, eating, talking, and how much energy he wasted just trying to escape the fog, trying to force his thoughts to be clear, trying to control something that could not be controlled directly. And Daniel remembered advice he had once read in a book: when your mind is foggy, do not fight it. Observe it like a river flowing past you. Do not swim against it. At first, he did not understand these words, but now he felt their meaning, because the fog in his mind was like a river he could not stop, and swimming against it only made him more tired, more anxious, more lost, and so he began to experiment. Walking slowly, noticing the fog, naming it silently. This is fog. These are thoughts. This is pressure. This is fear. And as he did this, he realized that naming the fog made it smaller, less threatening, because when things are nameless, they feel larger, mysterious, and overwhelming. But when you name them, you see them for what they are. And the fog began to shift slightly as he walked, and he noticed how his breathing changed too. Shallow, quick breaths had made the fog thicker, but slow. Deep breaths created pockets of clarity, little windows through the mist, and Daniel realized that his body and mind were connected, and if he paid attention to one, the other could follow. And as he walked past a bookstore, he remembered a conversation with a friend about mindfulness, how the mind could be trained to see clearly even in chaos, and he thought about trying it, not as a perfect practice, not as a solution to all problems, but as an experiment. as a small step to understand his mind and the fog that lived there, and he stopped for a moment, leaning on a lamppost, and focused on his breathing. Slow inhale, slow exhale, and with each breath, he felt the fog shift, a little less heavy, a little less confusing, and he smiled quietly because even though the fog was still there, he could see through it. He could notice its patterns. He could observe it without panic, and this was a small victory, a tiny transformation, but real, and it reminded him of something else. Clarity is not a permanent state. It is a practice, a choice we make moment by moment, breath by breath, observation by observation, and as he continued walking, he thought about the times in life when fog appeared suddenly, when confusion or worry seemed too big to handle, and he realized that those moments were not failures, they were invitations to slow down, to notice, to breathe, to take a step back instead of forward, and in that understanding, he felt a little lighter, as if the fog had given him a lesson he could carry with him, a lesson he could return to whenever he felt lost. And Daniel noticed that even simple actions became meaningful in the fog, feeling the texture of the pavement under his shoes, noticing the sound of birds in the trees, feeling the wind on his face, each sensation grounding him, connecting him to the present moment, and he realized that clarity comes not from controlling thoughts, but from returning to the present, to noticing what is, to observing without judgment. And as he walked past a small fountain, watching the water ripple and fall, he understood that the fog would always come back, sometimes thicker, sometimes lighter, but now he had tools, small habits, naming the fog, observing it, breathing deeply, and noticing the present, and with these tools, he felt ready to face moments that once would have overwhelmed him, and he reflected that clarity was not a final goal, it was a journey, a skill to practice daily, and that this journey could be gentle, patient, forgiving, because the mind, like the fog, is always moving, changing, and responding to care. And as he approached a quiet street, he felt the fog lift slightly, enough to see distant buildings, passing cars, and people smiling, and he realized that even a little clarity felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, warming him, guiding him, and he promised himself he would return to this practice throughout the day, noticing the fog when it came, naming it, observing it, breathing through it, and he understood that this was not just about thinking clearly, it was about living clearly, being present, feeling life fully without letting confusion or fear control him, and Daniel smiled quietly to himself, feeling the first real sense of control he had felt in weeks, not control over life, not control over the world, but control over his mind, small but powerful, enough to continue moving forward, enough to face challenges, enough to trust that even when the fog returned, he would not be lost, because he had learned to see, to breathe, to notice, and to let clarity grow slowly, steadily, like the sun breaking through a misty morning. Daniel arrived at his workplace feeling a small sense of calm from his morning practices, but the moment he stepped into the office, the noise hit him, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people talking quickly, conversations overlapping. And it felt like the fog from the morning had multiplied, swirling around his head, making everything feel chaotic, and he realized how easily life's noise can invade the mind if we are not careful, and he remembered the lessons from the park and the streets. Noticing, breathing, observing, and he decided to test them here, right in the middle of the storm, and so he walked to his desk slowly, letting each step feel deliberate, noticing the floor under his feet, the air in the room, the rhythm of sounds around him. And he allowed himself to breathe deeply, counting each breath quietly in his mind. 1, 2, 3, and with each breath, he felt the noise become background, less threatening, less demanding. Like a distant river rather than a roaring waterfall, and he reminded himself that noise, both outside and inside, does not have to control him, that he could create space even when the world felt loud, and he began organizing his tasks for the day. Not by urgency or pressure, but by simplicity, asking himself, what is the next small step I can take right now? Not the whole mountain, just the next stone, and as he wrote a short list on his notebook, he noticed something important. Clarity comes when we slow down enough to see one thing at a time, when we stop letting the world's noise dictate our attention. And he remembered another lesson from the morning, observing thoughts like clouds, allowing them to pass without judgment, and he realized that this approach could apply to external noise too, noticing sounds, conversations, interruptions, but letting them flow past without letting them overwhelm him, and he began to feel a strange sense of power, a quiet control, because the noise had not stopped, yet he was no longer lost in it, no longer pulled in all directions, and he discovered that small pauses, even a few seconds to breathe, could create a rhythm in the day, a rhythm where clarity could grow, where thinking clearly was possible even amidst chaos, and as he continued working, he reflected on how life often feels like this. Fast, loud, demanding, but the clarity we seek is always inside, waiting for us to notice, to create space, to breathe, to focus, and he remembered his grandfather's words again, when life becomes blurry, slow down. And he understood that slowing down is not weakness, it is a skill, a way to break the noise without escaping life, a way to find calm and think clearly even when everything is moving quickly. And Daniel decided to share a small experiment with his colleague, someone he trusted. Simply asking if they could work together quietly for 10 minutes without phones, without interruptions, and to his surprise, it worked, and the quiet made their minds sharper, their conversation clearer, their work more focused. And he realized that creating clarity sometimes requires courage, courage to step back, to say no to noise, to protect your space, and he felt proud of himself for trying this simple act, because small steps like these can transform the way we experience life, making it feel lighter, less overwhelming, and more meaningful. And he noticed how connected everything was, observing the fog, breathing, noticing the noise, creating space, taking small steps and reflecting, each building on the other, forming a path toward clear thinking that was practical, accessible, and real, not abstract or impossible. And as the morning passed, Daniel continued practicing, noticing when his mind wandered, bringing himself back to the present, naming thoughts, breathing through stress, and gradually he felt a sense of flow, a quiet focus that allowed him to work efficiently, speak calmly, and respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. and he understood that breaking the noise is not about escaping life, but about learning to live within it with awareness, patience, and clarity, and he felt a quiet joy in discovering this skill, a skill that he could carry anywhere, that could transform any noisy, overwhelming day into something manageable, even beautiful. And as lunchtime approached, he walked outside for a short break, noticing the sunlight, the movement of leaves, the rhythm of people walking, and he realized that life's noise is unavoidable, but peace is always possible when we learn to notice, breathe, and take deliberate steps. And Daniel smiled to himself, knowing that even though the day was not finished, even though challenges awaited, he had discovered a way to move through the noise, to find clarity in chaos, to think clearly even when life felt overwhelming, and he promised himself he would practice this daily, creating space in the mind, breaking the noise, and living with calm focus, one breath, one thought, one step at a time. After experiencing the morning and the early workday with small moments of clarity, Daniel realized that thinking clearly when life felt overwhelming did not happen in one big leap. It happened step by step, breath by breath, choice by choice. And he remembered how he had spent years feeling crushed under invisible weight, lost in fog, and lost in noise, always searching for a sudden solution or a quick fix, and now he understood that the mind works differently, that clarity grows slowly, like a tree, starting from tiny roots before it reaches the sky, and he began experimenting with this idea in small ways, first by noticing when he felt tension in his shoulders and consciously releasing it. Then by taking 5 minutes in the morning to breathe slowly before opening his emails. Then by writing down 1 or 2 simple tasks instead of a long, overwhelming list. And he noticed that even these small actions made a big difference, creating space in his mind, making it easier to think, decide, and act. And he realized that humans often underestimate the power of small steps, because we look for dramatic change, immediate solutions, and perfect clarity, when in reality, life is built from small, deliberate moments that accumulate. And as he walked to a nearby cafe for lunch, he thought about the lessons he had learned that morning, about noticing the fog, breaking the noise, observing thoughts, slowing down, breathing, and he saw how each small step he had taken created a chain reaction, giving him a sense of calm that he could carry through the rest of the day. And he smiled quietly because it felt empowering to realize that he did not need to fix everything at once. He only needed to take the next step, and then the next, and then the next, with patience, with awareness, and with care. And as he ate a simple sandwich while watching people pass outside the window, he reflected on his morning walks, the brief encounters, the experiments with observing thoughts, and he understood that life itself is a series of small steps, and if we ignore them, the world feels overwhelming. But if we notice them, the world becomes manageable, even beautiful. And he remembered a time when he had tried to multitask constantly, to finish too much at once, and how exhausting it had been, how stressed and confused he felt, and he realized that the mind thrives on simplicity, focus, and small, achievable steps. And he made another quiet promise to himself, that he would focus on one thing at a time, giving his full attention to it, finishing it, reflecting on it, and then moving to the next. And he noticed how different this felt from rushing, panicking, or forcing clarity. And he realized that small steps were not just about productivity. They were about self-care, about protecting mental space. about giving himself permission to think clearly without pressure, and he reflected on the morning woman who told him to slow down, the fog he had noticed in the park, the noise he had broken at work, and he saw a clear connection. All of it pointed to one truth: that small, deliberate actions are more powerful than frantic, desperate attempts to fix everything. And as he left the cafe and returned to his office, he began to apply this principle again, taking each task slowly, observing thoughts, breathing, pausing before reacting to emails or messages, and he felt the satisfaction of progress without pressure, and he realized that thinking clearly does not require perfect conditions, a silent room, or a free schedule. It requires patience, attention, and a commitment to small steps, and he smiled at the idea that such a simple concept had the power to change the way he experienced his day. And he noticed something else, that small steps build confidence, because when you see that you can move forward slowly and deliberately, that you can manage one small task, one small thought, one small moment, you begin to trust yourself, and that trust grows, and over time, small steps accumulate into meaningful change. And Daniel reflected that this is the same principle that applies to life beyond thinking clearly: relationships, learning, health, creativity, happiness, all grow from small, consistent actions, not giant leaps, and he felt grateful for this insight, for the morning lessons, and for the quiet moments that had allowed him to notice, breathe, and act deliberately. And as the afternoon sun shone through the office window, he realized that small steps also reduce overwhelm, because when we focus on one thing at a time, we do not invite the weight of everything else into our mind. And he felt lightened, calmer, ready to face challenges without fear, and he thought about the future, not with anxiety, but with curiosity, seeing it as a series of small steps waiting to be taken. And he understood that even when life feels overwhelming, even when fog clouds the mind, even when noise surrounds us, small steps provide a path forward, a way to think clearly, to feel capable, to move through the day with calm focus. And he promised himself that he would practice this daily, returning to small steps whenever he felt lost, overwhelmed, or confused, because in these small actions, he could find clarity, peace, and confidence. And Daniel walked back to his desk with a quiet smile, ready to continue his day, one small, deliberate step at a time. By mid-afternoon, Daniel noticed that even with small steps, the day still brought chaos: emails piling up, unexpected calls, a colleague asking for help, a sudden meeting, and the world outside his mind moving at full speed. And he felt a familiar tension rise in his chest, the kind he had experienced countless times before. But now he remembered the lessons he had practiced all morning, and he paused for a moment, noticing the sensation, naming it silently. This is stress. This is tension. This is life happening. And the simple act of naming it made the tension feel slightly less threatening, less immediate, and he took a slow, deep breath, letting it fill his lungs and slowly release. And as he did this, he noticed a small calm spreading inside him, like a quiet river flowing beneath the noise, and he realized that calm is not the absence of chaos, but the ability to remain grounded and aware even when chaos is present. And he remembered the woman on the street, the fog in the park, the noisy office, and the small steps he had taken, and he saw a pattern emerging. Clarity and calm come from noticing, naming, breathing, observing, and acting deliberately, and he understood that chaos in life is unavoidable. But chaos in the mind is optional. depending on how we respond, and he reflected on how often he had reacted to stress automatically, letting it take over, letting thoughts spiral, letting fear control decisions. And he realized that this old pattern was not useful, not necessary, and not permanent, and so he tried something new. He focused fully on the present moment, noticing his surroundings, the rhythm of typing keyboards, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the distant chatter of colleagues, the sunlight on his desk, and with each observation, he felt calmer, more grounded, more capable, and he understood that calm is built from awareness, and awareness grows through small, intentional acts, like pausing to breathe, noticing tension, naming thoughts, observing without judgment, and taking one deliberate step. And he began to experiment further, asking himself, what is the next small thing I can do right now to move forward calmly? And he applied this question to tasks, emails, conversations, even internal thoughts, and he noticed that the day, which had once felt overwhelming and chaotic, now felt manageable, almost rhythmical, like a song with quiet pauses between notes, and he felt gratitude for this discovery because it reminded him that he had the ability to influence his inner state even when the outer world could not be controlled. And he reflected on how many times he had felt helpless in chaos, thinking that external events controlled his mind. And now he realized that while external events are unpredictable, his response is always a choice, and choosing calm is possible, even when life feels heavy, overwhelming, or fast. And he smiled quietly at the idea that calm is not a destination, but a practice, a daily habit, a small flame we can protect in our mind. And he noticed that even a few seconds of noticing and breathing could interrupt a spiral of stress, prevent fog from thickening, and create a space for clarity to return. And as he looked out the window at the city moving below, he felt connected to the rhythm of life, seeing that people around him were busy, each carrying their own weight, and he thought about how many of them could benefit from just a few seconds of calm, a small pause to breathe and notice. And he understood that calm is a skill we can cultivate, share, and carry with us wherever we go. And he practiced once more, closing his eyes for a brief moment, noticing his heartbeat, the rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his shoulders, the thoughts passing by, and he let them float without trying to stop them. And as he opened his eyes, he felt a quiet strength inside, a sense that even in chaos, he was capable, aware, and present. And he realized that life will always bring challenges, surprises, noise, and unexpected turns, but with awareness, calm, and deliberate action, he could navigate them without losing clarity, without letting overwhelm take over. And he felt proud of the progress he had made that day, recognizing that even small moments of calm in chaos are victories. And he promised himself that he would return to this practice daily, in every situation, in every storm, because calm is not something that happens magically. It is something we create, step by step, breath by breath, thought by thought. And as the afternoon turned into evening, Daniel packed his bag, feeling lighter than he had in weeks, noticing the rhythm of his movements, the sound of his footsteps, the air outside the office. And he understood that the lessons of the day, small steps, noticing the fog, breaking the noise, finding calm, were tools he could carry into every day of his life, helping him think clearly, act deliberately, and live fully, even when life felt overwhelming. And with this realization, he walked out of the office quietly, smiling, breathing, and feeling a deep sense of inner peace that he knew would guide him tomorrow and the day, which had begun with tension and overwhelm, ended with clarity, calm, and the quiet understanding that he had the power to shape his mind even when the world refused to slow down.